I think clarity gives you access. Clarity gives you access to the best parts of yourself.
Welcome to Dr. Laura CL, the podcast. I'm so excited. We're in season 2, and I'm so excited to bring on Sherri Coale onto the podcast today and go deep into a fun conversation about life changes, career changes, books, and, overall just living life in a meaningful way. So, welcome to the show, Sherri.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So I'd love to start off. You know, e- Everyone can read your bio. I want you to share right now with the audience who you are and what do you want the audience to know about you right now? What do you want the listeners to know?
Well, I'm going to start at the top of the chain.
Okay.
Christian. I'm a believer. I'm a grandmother. And I'm going to even refine that. I'm a Gigi. Um, I have 2 children, a husband of almost 40 years. We live in Norman, Oklahoma, where I was the head women's basketball coach at the University of Oklahoma for 25 years, quarter of a century. That sounds so long. Um, I was a high school basketball coach and teacher before that. Before that, I was a college basketball player. And before that, I was a little girl growing up in a small town in southern Oklahoma where I fell in love with basketball and books and have been a reader and a writer all my life. And so when the COVID hit us and sort of turned, well, it did turn the world upside down, but it also turned inside of institutions, it turned sports upside down. I had some time to think. And I loved my job at the University of Oklahoma. Loved, loved, loved my job at the University of Oklahoma. But there were other things that I wanted to do. I didn't want to only be a basketball coach. And when COVID hit and I had time to think about it, I thought, you're kind of halfway across the finish line here. If you want to do something else, you better get about the business of doing it. And so I began to write, and I'm having an absolute blast at this stage in my life. Public speaking, writing, some consulting, a whole lot of GGing, a little playing tennis. It's just been really, really good.
Hmm. You can tell. I think listeners can tell in listening to you that you definitely have a passion for life. And it
For sure.
comes through, and as you talk it's not fake. You're just not talking on the surface. There's a real deep passion for it. I want to ask you, so what jumped out at me was little girl basketball books. So how did you get into both of those, and how did those fit together when you were young?
Well, a couple of different stories there. First of all, the small town I grew up in was the kind of place we had one stoplight. You could walk basically from one end of town to the other if you needed to. Everybody knew everybody, and everybody
Mhm.
helped raise everybody. It was just this big village, and no one in my family particularly participated in athletics. My dad had played a little bit in high school, a little bit of baseball in high school, but when my mom went to school, there were no opportunities for females to be athletes. And
Right.
so I went to a basketball camp with a friend, and I say a friend, she was my hero. She was the best player on the Healdton High School girls basketball team. And she invited me to go to a basketball camp with her when I was in the 5th grade. And
And
I
had you
went.
been playing at this point? Had
Oh
you
no,
been
I'd
playing basketball?
never played
No.
before. I was a
Okay.
fifth grader, and that at that time that wasn't
Okay.
odd. Today it's like if you don't start on by the time you're four, no chance. But it wasn't
Right.
odd at that time. I loved going to the games. When you live in a small town, you go to all the games. Everybody does, and so Starla Cosper was my hero. Is that a great name or what for a
That's
hero?
a great name.
Um, and she asked my granny if I could go to a day basketball camp that
Oh.
our school and a nearby town were hosting together. And my granny said, "Well, sure." My mom was at work, and so I stayed with my granny during the day in the summer, and she said, "Well, sure." So I went, and I fell even further in love with Starla Cosper as my hero, but I also fell in love with that little orange ball, and it just became what I did in every spare second. I used to sneak out. We had a living room where our piano was, a formal living room, and I was taking piano lessons, and it had a door to the outside, and I would sneak out the door and go shoot baskets. And after a while, like my mother didn't know that was happening, my mother sat me down and said, do you really want to play the piano or would you rather play basketball? And I said, oh, I'd really rather play basketball, Mom. She's like, all right, well, let's just quit forking out the money for piano and get about it. So it was that. And then the books. When I was little, I have early memories of my granny taking me to the public library, and they would do film strips on the old projectors that you could hear click, and then you could hear the whoosh of the fan.
Right.
And I would watch Curious George, and I learned how to read reading Curious George books when I was little. It's one of my earliest memories. And I fell in love with the library, the smell of
Mm.
it, the feel of it, the freedom of it. I could just explore. And I used to check out Henry Wadsworth Longfellow when I was in elementary school.
Wow. Wow.
We used to have those Scholastic book club
Right,
things
right. Yeah.
for books. All my friends would be buying these little, game books and little mysteries. And I bought They Call Me Coach by John Wooden. I was
Oh,
in the fifth grade.
wow.
I still have the copy on my shelf that
That's really interesting, isn't
I know,
it?
I know. Isn't that crazy? I love
Yeah.
sports and I loved reading. And Coach Wooden was an English instructor and he was big on quotes and I loved quotes. And so
Mhm.
I fell in love with that book and I had the unbelievable good fortune of meeting Coach Wooden as an adult. And I got him to
Wow.
sign that copy
Oh, what a
of They Call
gift.
Me Coach, a little paperback that was so yellowed and turned through the years, but it's one of my prized possessions.
Oh, and how amazing that you still have it.
Yeah,
That's
it was
pretty
important to
special.
me, and
Yeah.
I knew it would play a role. And then I
Did
had
you
twins.
know, but did you know what role it was going to play? Like you were
I
so young at that point. Did you
no,
have a vision of what you wanted to do when you were
I
older?
I did
You
admire my
did.
teachers.
Uh-huh.
Dramatic. I had a dramatic, emphatic um, respect and admiration for my fifth grade basketball coach, who was also my English teacher. And I can
Hmm.
remember thinking it would be cool to grow up and have a life like that. I can remember
Wow.
thinking that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then I was just so in love with ball. I couldn't imagine having a job where I didn't have ball in my life. I mean, I just couldn't.
Right.
So here's something that fits. I could coach, and then I had a remarkable high school English teacher. Her name was Jolene Lewis, and she really encouraged my writing. She never let me off the hook, and would sort of push me to do things that maybe she wasn't pushing other people in the class to do.
Right.
And I learned so much from her about the
Those are
word.
those special teachers, right?
Oh,
Who
and we all
see
have them.
something. We all have them. And sometimes, you know, sometimes they don't even know the impact that they have on us, right? I mean, I think about it could be one word, one sentence that someone says to you that can have a profound impact. And I would just say for anyone listening, just think about who in your life, especially when we're younger, had that type of an impact where something they said or they noticed something about you and then helped bring it out of you. It's very subtle sometimes, but it can have a profound impact in someone's life going forward.
And I would go one step further to say, once you think about that person, find them. Find them and tell them. My first book was called Rooted to Rise. And it's really, when I step back from it, it's a giant thank you letter to people whose path crossed with mine and impacted my life. But some of the stories in there are about some of my teachers. And the exchange when you let someone know how much they impacted you, the difference that makes. And as a former
Yeah,
teacher, I get to feel it from that side as well.
right,
And
right,
typically it's things that you don't ever think about, that you don't
right.
even really remember, but that student does. And so to
And
take the
that's
time
so
to,
important. Yeah, and that's so important for all of us to remember. It's not necessarily some big grand gesture. And yeah, I wanted to highlight, because one of the things is as you were speaking about some of the people who were influential in your life, very clear with their names, very clear about the specific ways that they impacted you. And I wanted to have you talk a little bit about that book because I'm guessing, but correct me if I'm wrong, in that process of writing that, you became very clear about all those different points along your journey, all the people, all the words, all the experiences along your journey. I mean, that's a huge self-reflection to go back into childhood and move through and think, and then, as you said, acknowledge them in whatever way, in person, via letter. Were there any stories in there that you would want to highlight that might be inspiring for people listening?
Oh yeah, and as you said that, I think about that there would just be this tiny bit of mica, just this little bitty thing. And as I started to write about it, I would remember more. And I think
Uh,
that's one of the beautiful outcomes from writing that you don't dive into searching for. It just happens sort of serendipitously as you go along. You just uncover things. One quick kind of neat story about my high school English teacher. She had written in my senior yearbook, I expect to have a novel with your name across it someday. And I was, all into basketball. I was going to college to play basketball and I was excited about basketball. Went to college and came home for a homecoming football game or something on a weekend. And I remember seeing Mrs. Lewis at the football game. And she's this tiny little woman. I'm only 5'4" and she's tiny to me. And she
oh my
reached up
goodness.
and grabbed my shoulders and she said, I know you're doing this basketball thing, but I still expect to see your name across the front of a novel someday. And we laughed.
Wow.
We both laughed, and okay, great. And so then when I wrote Rooted to Rise, I sent her, obviously, a copy of the book. And there's a story about her in there as well. And I got the most beautiful letter back from her in that she had always wanted to be a writer and she became a teacher and her life got full and she had a whole bunch of kids and one thing leads to another and that novel never got finished. But when I wrote Rooted to Rise and she got the copy with my name on the front, it felt like she had sort of written one too. And I
Wow.
keep that letter right there in a box because it means so much to me that she is proud of me, but also that in some weird sort of twisted way, I helped her maybe reach a goal too. And
Right,
so,
you contributed. And I think that's such a great thing. What you're saying is it's not just one direction. It's not.
right,
As long as you're sharing it, right? Like it's like as long as you're sharing. If the person doesn't know, then there's that. But in the knowing, there is an exchange and it's not just one-sided.
absolutely not. It's much like gratitude. Anytime you send a
Yeah,
thank you note somewhere, you feel it every bit as much as
yeah,
the person who's sending it to, and it rebounds back to you.
yeah.
One of my favorite stories in Rooted to Rise is actually about my son's kindergarten teacher. Um, I'll try to be brief as I tell the story. 'Cause it would take up all of our time if I went into massive detail. But the long and short of it is that I was a very, very busy Division I head basketball coach, and my son was in kindergarten, and he was very much on top of things. And we got these Thursday folders that told us what was happening in the upcoming week at school. These were regular. And he came in one day and he said, Mom, tomorrow is pajama day. And I said, Really? Okay. And so I went and got the Thursday folder and looked, and I didn't see anything about it. And I said, Are you sure tomorrow's pajama day? And he said, Yes, Miss Eder said. That's his kindergarten
Hmm.
teacher. And I said, Well, okay. And so when I put him to bed, he laid out his pajamas. He was all so excited. And I went back and I got that Thursday folder and I looked through it and I was like, I don't see anything in here, but he is adamant. And I thought, well, maybe he'll forget about it. Next morning, he wakes up, it's pajama day, and comes in with his Spider-Man PJs on. He's all excited. And I kind of had this itch in my stomach, but he was always so on top of things. I
Oh,
just thought, okay, he knows what he's talking about. I got 50 million balls in the air. I'm the one that not paying attention. So I take him to school, and when we're in the drop-off line, I see other kids running into school and they don't have their pajamas on. And I'm like, and this is my first child, so I'm like, oh my God, I'm the
right.
biggest history of ever. It's going to be awful. It's going to scar him for the rest of his life. And then I thought, well, maybe it's just a kindergarten thing because it's separate and these are all bigger kids. So I let him out and I kept waiting at my office thinking I get a call that says, oh, Colton's really upset. Can you come to school? He needs clothes. Never got
Right.
the call. I picked him up that day. And when I was in line to pick him up, I see all these kindergartners going to the car and none of them have PJs on.
Okay.
And I'm dying. Like literally, I can still feel it inside of my chest. My son is 31 years old and I feel it in my chest right now. And Miss Eder came walking Colton to the car, and he had on his PJs, and she had on these fuzzy bunny slippers. And when she got to the car, I said, Hi, Miss Eder, was it pajama day today? And she said, It sure was. And I want you to know that Colton is an extraordinary listener, and I'm so proud of him. He was our leader today. And I said, Okay, thank you. Thank you. She shut the door, waved. He's happy as a lark. I'm confused. I get home later that night, she calls me and she said, I have a confession to make. I told the kids yesterday that tomorrow's pajama day. And it's the end of the day, and I don't, I looked at the calendar wrong. And she said, afterward, I thought, oh dear, I said it's pajama day and it's not. But she said, kids are never paying attention. I don't think anything about it. And she said, when he walked in the door this morning, my heart dropped. And I said, oh, you do not need to apologize because what she did was put on her bunny slippers and make him
Right.
king for the day.
Wow.
And that has
Wow.
sat with me forever, the power of a teacher to take a teachable moment and really impact a kid. And
Right.
we laugh about it to this day. It is one of my most favorite memories. It's so raw inside of me. But that's
Hmm.
what teachers do. They look for
Yeah.
ways to teach kids things that aren't on the curriculum. And I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for Lynn Etter for
Hmm.
that.
I love that. It makes me think. I think I had shared with this with you off the air, but it makes me think of, this was in high school for me, a teacher who, it was not direct, it was indirect, and yet it had such a powerful influence. It was like he was able to see that I was struggling with something. We were in small groups and we were supposed to figure out who was going to be the leader. And we were in groups of like 4 or 5, and I was super quiet, super shy, and I wasn't talking very much. And in my head, I was thinking, well, of course, like this is what we're going to do, XYZ, ABC. Like in my mind, I had it all. And it was as if he could see what was happening inside my mind. And he just kind of leaned into the group and he said, remember, as you're working on this, it's not necessarily the loudest person or the person who speaks the most who's the best leader in a situation. So he said, didn't make us do anything, but I have no idea what everyone else thought, but I know what it meant to me, right? It was, oh, it doesn't have to look his way, her way, Now, it took a while to really step into that, but it's always been there since that moment. I don't even know. And I have not gone back. He's, I'm sure, no longer with us, but
You
I
should
didn't
search
have a
him out
chance.
just in case.
Okay, I
And if
will.
not, and if not, then pass it on in his name and his memory. Teach
Yeah,
that to other
I
people.
love that. I
Because
love that. Okay, everyone listening, you heard what Sherri said. Don't let it go at that. So let's talk a little bit about basketball and coaching. So you play, I mean, from the very beginning, from the first moment that you had, it sounds like it was just something that connected with you. And it sounds like, just based on what you've said so far, you it stayed I mean, it's been a part of, it is a part of your life,
oh
right?
yeah, it's been the vehicle for my life.
Yeah.
There's
So
no.
what was the transition for you from playing to coaching? What was that like?
Um, I was so excited about the opportunity. I was first a high school coach, and I was so excited about the opportunity that it helped minimize the pain of
Mm.
not being able to play anymore. It,
Okay.
it was a different way of being around the game every single day. It was a different
Right.
way of following my passion. And so I mean, I vividly remember the last game I ever played in college. I remember sitting on the steps at the field house at Oklahoma City University after it was over and kind of like, wow, I'll never play again competitively.
Right.
I remember that moment, but I was about to get married in the upcoming summer. I had a job lined up. There was the next thing. And I
Right.
think that's such an important part of transitions because after coaching for 30 plus years, I was a high school coach, a head high school coach for 7 years, then the head coach at the University of Oklahoma for 25. So, after doing that for so long, when I decided I want to do something else for a while, it was probably way easier than it maybe should have been or could have been
Hmm.
or people
Okay.
expected it to be. And I had a dear friend say, how have you done this? How have you just stayed in stride as you're,
Hmm.
jumping across this chasm? And I said, I honestly think it's because I'm running towards something, not away from
Right.
something. And I feel like that was
Right.
the case from a college player to a coach, and then from a coach to a writer and speaker and whatever this life is on the other side. There's something else I want to do. There's something else I want to do. I love
Right.
that. And I'm
Right.
so glad I did that and I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I also want to do this. I've always
Right.
said I'm that girl that wishes she had 37 lives because there's just so many things I want to do. There
Right.
will be no way I can live long enough to do all the things I want to do.
Oh,
So
I
you
love
just
that.
keep
I
chasing.
get goosebumps. I get goosebumps when you say that because when one, there was a moment in my life, it was right after my mom died when I realized, and you just kind of reflect on your life and how much time you have and you never know when your moment is. And I remember thinking exactly what you just said. I will never, even if I live to, let's say, 110, I will never be able to do everything that I'm super excited to do. Travel places I want to travel to, experiences I want to have, books, like creating things, and then I realized, well, that's not a negative. That's an incredibly beautiful and positive way to approach life. And I was having the contrast of someone else in my life at the time where uh, they had gone into fear when my mom had died, kind of like, oh my gosh, what, like panic about
What now? Yeah.
living life, right? So I,
Yep.
I recognized there was such a different response. And for me, it was, well, what am I going to do today? Right? Like, if I just accept that at the moment I die, I will still have 1,000 things that I want to experience and do. Like you said, 37 different lives, whatever it is, in order to do it. And did I do something that I love today? Am I grateful for what I am experiencing today? Am I connecting? Am I loving? Am I, all of those things that are so important? And if I'm doing that, that's okay that I still have other things that I want to do. So I love that you're sharing that, and the passion of playing, the passion of coaching, the passion of, well, now what's possible with my books and with my speaking. So that transition as well was fairly straightforward for you from the coaching to the writing piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I've always written. I say always, and let me put an asterisk by that. When social media and cell phones came into play in the middle-ish of my college coaching career at Oklahoma, that sort of changed. I didn't write as much because I was
Oh,
expected to be texting coaches and talking to, I mean, you had this
oh,
constant access with the
right,
people, high school coaches and the families of the people you're recruiting, and you just had this constant access. And I can't say that I can't fault, I chose to do that, but I
right,
felt like I needed to do that for my profession. And so I had
right,
always journaled, and I had written we didn't call it blogs in those days. I called it a
right.
journal. I had one on our website back before blogs were a thing. And
Mm,
writing was something I did to understand my world, to think
mm,
through dilemmas and challenges, and to a place to vent, a place to dream. It was all those things for me. So I had
right.
always written. I just hadn't always published it, except for that journal that was on our website. It was a coach's journal. And so during COVID, when I had that time, I began to write again. The sports information director at Oklahoma asked me if I would write an article for the website, the university website, because more eyes were on Soonersports.com, which is our athletic website, than ever before, obviously, because none of us had anything to do. We were all stuck at home and everybody was looking
Right.
at their computer. And Soonersports.com had no content because their content was
Mm.
games and we weren't playing games. We were all stuck at
Oh,
home.
wow.
So they
Okay.
were just desperate. They were rerunning things and they were desperate for
Okay.
content. And the sports information director knew that I loved to write. And so he just asked if I would write an article for the webpage. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And I sat down to start to write. And I thought, wow, I've missed this. And then I worked on it a little
Mm.
while longer and revised it and stayed up till 2 in the morning and got up the next day and worked on it. And before you knew it, I'd been working on it for like 48 hours and I wasn't tired. And I felt like I was on cloud nine. And I thought,
Wow.
I have really missed this. This is my happy place. This is that thing that makes my heart sing. And I want
Wow.
to be able to do it. And I couldn't see a functional way realistically to do it, really do it the way I wanted to do it and
Right.
continue coaching. And so I published that article called An Athlete's Ache on Sooner webpage. And that was that. I just made the decision then, although I didn't tell anyone then, but I made the decision then that that would be my last season.
Wow. And give us like what was one of your highlights during your college coaching? career?
Oh goodness, there are so
I
many.
know, I know there's so many, but just which one pops up right now that you'd want to
Well,
share?
we went to three Final Fours, and those are always extraordinary opportunities. There are so many amazing coaches that never get an opportunity to coach in the Final Four, and that's
Hmm.
only because their players aren't good enough. I was fortunate enough to have good enough players to do that and an amazing staff. But in 2002, that was our first Final Four, and the best moment was the moment that we knew we were going. We were playing in Boise,
Mm,
Idaho. We were playing Colorado. There were about 12 minutes to go in the second half, and we were so good. We were so in the zone. Everything was clicking. Everything made sense. Everybody I put in made baskets. You could just tell there was no way they were going to beat
right,
us. And I remember
right.
looking up at the center hung scoreboard and thinking, in about 11 minutes and some change, we're going to the Final Four.
Wow.
And there's no moment better than that. That's a private moment. You're not
Right.
celebrating. There's no confetti. You're not putting the cool ball cap on. You're not cutting down the nets. None of that stuff. It's
Right.
just a very private, internal
Mm.
moment. That's the one I remember most vividly.
Beautiful. I love that. And I love that too because it speaks to there are those big moments that we share and that are very loud and vivid, and there are a lot of people involved, but there are those private moments, and not just in, a college coaching career, but in our life where being able
Absolutely.
to feel that and being able to have that feeling, and I hear also a gratitude in your voice, right? There's a celebration, there's a gratitude, there's an excitement, and having that be within you at that particular moment. I love that because I
Period.
think that happens, and sometimes we gloss over that because it's not the big celebration, right? So thank you for sharing that. um
Yeah.
Say a little bit more about, you have another book. It's coming out or might be out when this airs. So tell the audience, tell us about what the inspiration is for that, and what they can expect to see, experience, and read.
Well, I will first say that when I sat down to write the first book, Rooted to Rise, I didn't have a book in mind. I just COVID ended. I walked away from coaching and I just kept writing. I just went to the backyard barefoot to the cabana and just kept writing and writing and writing. And then I got it all together and thought this might be a book. And as I mentioned
Well, hey,
earlier,
can I pause
back,
you for a second?
yeah,
Do you write out? Did you write on a computer? What's your
I write
process?
I write on a computer.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
and I'm not I've read about, I forget the terms that people use for, I forget if it's splasher or something, where you analyze every sentence as you write it down, or you write a whole bunch of sentences real fast and then you go back and polish them up. I'm somewhere in the middle of those two is my
Okay.
way. I'm not necessarily, morning pages is something that a lot of writers do. They write every
Mm-hmm.
morning, stream of consciousness without
Mm-hmm.
picking up their pen. That doesn't necessarily work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an idea writer, and so I will write a paragraph, or if a sentence comes into my head, I'll write it down,
Mm-hmm.
write it. I'm talking with the ink
Right,
pen.
right.
And that's really where the stories in Rooted to Rise stemmed from. I have a giant Moses basket in my study,
Mm-hmm.
and I, through the years, had just thrown snippets of things in there. They weren't stories, they weren't complete thoughts or ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and examples, there's a story in that book about Whitney Hand, one of my players at Oklahoma, about the night that she tore her knee for the final time after multiple knee surgeries and her career was over. And when I got home from her house after the game that night, I got home at like 2 or 3 in the morning and I just wrote down on a piece of paper, I don't think that I will ever forget the empty sobs of an athlete's carcass. And
Oh,
and I just threw it into the Moses basket, didn't think about it again. But when I retired, I went through that Moses basket and found all these bits and pieces,
wow.
and the story of Whitney from Rooted to Rise really grew from that one comment that I had tossed in the basket that night, that
Mm-hmm.
morning at 2 or 3.
So that's
So,
interesting. So you do hand write when it's a thought or a
oh yeah,
paragraph or just something. But that's cool.
oh
Okay,
yeah,
so
write things for
I
some crazy
interrupted
reason.
you. You were
That's all
saying you
right.
were going out to the
That,
cabana every day to write
yep,
on your computer.
yep. And I think a lot of people, a lot of Oklahoma sports fans thought that I would write a book, but everybody thought it would be the Oklahoma basketball story, and I
Right.
never wanted to write that book.
Interesting.
There, I lived it. I
Right.
don't, I'm not interested in exploring that process because I lived it fully. And I think that the key to interesting writing is that the writer has to be interested in what they're writing about, or the reader
Yeah.
won't
Oh,
be.
yeah. I agree with
So,
that.
yeah. So I just began writing, and then I figured out I have all these stories. How can I connect them? And I connected them with the metaphor of the redwood tree and how the roots grow down and hold one another up. And that's what these
Mhm.
people have done for me in my life. So that was book one, and I had to write that because it was really from the beginning. It was the
Right.
core. And
Right.
then I write a weekly blog on my website, sherrycole.com. And
Okay.
so after a while, I thought there are some common threads in these stories, and so I began to sort of group them and move them. And the compost file, my second book, grew from that. I have kept on the desktop of my laptop computer a file that's called the compost file for years, where I
Okay.
just dump thoughts, ideas, challenges, whatever. I just dump stuff. It's the digital version of my Moses basket.
Okay. Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And so when I began to group these stories together and find the common themes and write chapter introductions and tie it all together, I thought this is really it's compost. Compost is what makes things grow. It's
Right.
what eradicates disease. It's how you thrive. And that's what these stories are to me. They're stories of things that have made me think and scratch my head and wonder and rethink and unpack and live fully. And so that's what the stories are designed to do for others. It's like a giant diagram for people where
Right.
your overlap is at try. It's for a bunch of triers.
Okay. Okay. And so it's wait, you say it's for a bunch of triers.
Yes.
Okay.
It's actually the subtitle is for the striver in us all. It's the compost
Okay.
file for the striver in us all.
Oh, really cool. It's exciting.
Thank
Well,
you.
I'm excited for that to come out. And do you know what you're going to do next?
I'll write another one, I'm sure. I try to write every day. My schedule has changed a bit, and I think um, this is just one of the insights from having experienced big transitions. And we were
Right.
mentioning earlier,
Right.
ball player to coach, coach now to writer speaker, Gigi. Um, things change. Like my purpose statement changed a little bit when I left coaching, which it was to grow kids. That was it, two words, grow
Hmm.
kids. And then I move into this world, and it's now to nudge people to think and feel. It's a little different
Mm.
because I'm not just
Hmm.
working with young people every day.
Right. Right.
I think our rhythms, our organization of our days, I know for sure that I am my best early in the morning. 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock, those are the golden hours for me. 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, just throw me to the side of the road. I'm not very good right there. There's a wall. There's a giant wall. 6 o'clock's like tip time for a basketball game. I rebound and I get good at night. But those rhythms you learn to feel, all right, and you get the
Right.
schedule. Well, I did that. I got the schedule going, and then I had my son and his wife had their second daughter, and I kept their first daughter right when I finished coaching for a year. I kept her 3 days a week. And then I got used to this writing life in between
Right.
for 3 years where I get up in the morning and I write. Well, now I
Right.
keep Scotty, my little granddaughter, 3 days a week. So I don't
Mm.
write early in the morning because she gets here at 7 when her mom goes to
Mm.
work.
Right.
And what I discovered is, you know what? I can write in the afternoon. I can write at 3 o'clock. I can do it.
Okay.
It's not doesn't come quite as easy as it does at 6,
Right.
but I can
Right.
do it. And for this phase of my life, because my priorities are so clear, I have no problem with that. So I have to
Yeah.
work a little harder at 3 than I do at 6. It's okay. I can do that because I
Yeah.
my priority is to be with that child as much as I can.
Right.
And so I think we have to shift with those seasons of our life,
Yeah.
based on
I
our
agree.
priorities. Our
Yeah, and I
schedules have
think the thing that I would highlight in what you're saying, that I definitely see in a lot of my clients is when you're unclear of what those, whether it's your values, your purpose, your priorities, however you want to say it. If you're unclear, or if you're, you could be going through a transition in those as well. But the important piece is to get the clarity around that first, because everything else then flows around that. And I love your example because as you speak it, it's very clear. You can feel it in your, I can feel the energy of it. There's just no doubt this is my priority right now. And this is what I'm going to do. And this is how I make it happen because it matters to me. Right.
That
And
clarity
if you
of
don't have that, if you don't have that clarity around the purpose, the the goals, kind of the why behind the goals is the way I think of it, because sometimes people will pick a goal and it's actually not connected, it's not aligned with what their values and what their priorities are. But when they are aligned, that's when you suddenly, things that maybe thought you couldn't do, or maybe it's a little bit harder, but you can make it happen then, right?
I think clarity gives you access. Clarity gives you access to the best parts of yourself. So whatever, if it's maybe easier at 6 and not as easy at 3, it gets easier at 3 because I'm really clear about what's most important, and it
Right.
makes you a faster, more nimble decision maker. It gives you access to
Yeah.
your greatest gifts. I believe that the time, whatever time it takes us to get really clear about who we are and what we want, the dividends pay off
Yeah.
multifold.
I agree. And honestly, it's so funny. I know when I'm working with clients and they want to go right immediately to the end goal, and I talk to them about, hey, like at first let's build the foundation. But it feels like, and every single person, it feels like it's taking too long
Yeah,
because you're like, I want to
absolutely.
go to the goal, want to go to the goal. And you know this. I mean, as a coach, I could imagine there are a lot of metaphors in there as a coach, right? Yeah, of course you want to win the game. Of course you want to get these, you want to score, you want high scores, you want, but hey, and John Wooden would be the first person to say it, right? You need to have a solid foundation in that, in what that is, in order to be able to have those successes, have those goals going forward.
Oh yeah, Coach Wooden would say, "Check your socks, get the wrinkles out of your socks." It starts right
Exactly.
there. You know, our first year, my first year, me and my staff, our first year at the University of Oklahoma. We're not going to go in and set a goal to win a national championship, and they hadn't won any games before. It was a really, it was program was in a bad spot. And I remember clearly, and this goes back to you talking about those little private moments. I remember
Right.
clearly in January of that first year. Now we've been practicing since October, and our season was halfway over in January. We had our first really solid 2-hour practice. We practiced the way we were supposed to practice for 2 hours. I remember it. I remember telling our kids,
Wow.
okay, this is what you do to be able to do that thing that you say you want to do. But you have
Right.
to do
Right.
this thing
Right.
over and over and over again to have a shot at that. And there's a lot of
Right.
pieces and parts in between there. And I think for individuals who are trying to learn how to lead organizations or further develop that, and you start at, who are you and what's important to you? And what are your core values? They sometimes
Right.
go, I'm trying to win a
Yeah.
championship here. Well,
Right, exactly.
first things
Well,
first.
you can do it one way. You can do it another way. If you do it this way, you're going to have the foundation, and you're going to be. It's going to be. It's not necessarily. It's going to be easy. It's just going to flow more easily, and it's going to, the way that you said. I think also openings happen that wouldn't happen
Yeah.
if you don't do that foundational work. So let's say, if you had the opportunity, I mean, where you are now with your wisdom, with your experience, what would you most want if there was one thing that you could say to the world? What would you want the world to know?
Boy, it's hard to say one thing. I can tell you that. Um, we had at every ingress and egress to our facility at the University of Oklahoma the words, leave your story better than you found it. That's what we wanted our players to do. A space, a person, an encounter, a period of time. Leave it better, make it better because you were there. So that's a big part of it. But I think back and we had personal standards. We didn't have a to do or not to do list. We had personal standards. We had 5 relational standards and 5 performance standards, and they were all important. And when you start to set out those things that really matter to you, there are so many words. There are so many words. There's so many things that you want, like it's
Right,
important. Integrity is important, and loyalty is important, and determination is important. You go through all
right.
these things. As I've gotten older, I really think I would, if I had it to do over again, I would boil it down to 3 little things. And those three things are number one, do your job. Do your job. We spend so much time worrying about how somebody else is doing their job or not doing their job, worrying about the job we've been given or not been given, worrying about the
Right.
job we want instead of the one that we have. If we just do our job, so much would flow positively because of that.
Mm,
The
mm,
second thing would be to pick up trash. And this sounds crazy, but I think that when you pay attention to little things, then the
mm,
big things take care of themselves. And it was a
mm.
big deal for us and for our players at Oklahoma. Just if you saw a water bottle on the floor, you picked it up. You didn't say, "Whose is this?" Why didn't you pick that?
Right.
You just pick it
Right.
up. That's what you do.
Right.
There's pre-wrap and there's tape, and you see it on the floor. You pick it up. You go through the bus when you get off of it to get on the plane, and you make sure everything's cleaned up. Just pick up trash. It sends a message that little things matter, that
Mm,
the planet is important, that we're not the most important thing because people
right.
are going to come after us. All those messages. And then the third thing I'd say is don't be dumb. I have a friend, I
You
have a
really
friend.
simplified these. Do
That
your
is our,
job, pick up trash, don't be dumb.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I have a friend who we just years ago started saying that to each other. When one of us would say, like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do that," the other one would go, "Don't be dumb. Don't be dumb." Or one of us would say, "Well, I thought when you didn't call that meant don't be dumb. Don't be
Mm,
dumb. It doesn't mean don't." In other words, don't erect invisible ghosts that you got to
yeah. Don't
spar with.
create stories. Don't
That's
don't
right.
let your mind create these stories that are taking you off track,
That's
that
right.
are
Because
bringing you away from what really is.
there
Yeah.
are enough challenges without us making up ones on our own, hurdles that,
Right.
setting up
Right.
hurdles that we can jump over along the way. And so throughout our friendship, when one of us is like getting off track like that, we just look at the other and go, "Don't be dumb. Don't be dumb." And then we just get right on back on track to wherever we were going. And so I think, honestly, Laura, if I had a team again, all those other things are important, but
Right.
I push them to the side and say, if you can do these three, we got a shot.
I love how down to earth and how clear and simple it is. Right. Because all the other things that you talked about, I don't know that you would necessarily be pushing them to the side. They're actually integrated in those three things that you just
No
talked
question.
about. Right.
No question.
So
Those
it's
words
just
just get so big and flighty. We use such
exactly.
floaty words
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
integrity, which means it's a great word, but it means
Yeah.
probably 45 different things to 45 different people.
Right.
And
Right.
so
Right. What does it
getting that
look
down
like?
to
Yeah.
palpable action.
Yeah, and one of the I know when I've worked with leadership teams in the past, I'll ask what what are the company values, and sometimes they don't even remember them, right? There
Oh,
is there
no.
is that piece, but let's say that they do, and then the question that I always have is, what does that look like in day to day business? How do you know if your team, your entire team, entire company, how do you know that what is it, what are the words, what are the actions that indicate that that really is happening? And it's fascinating, but there's not a whole lot of thought. Many times there's not a lot of thought in that, and sometimes just doing that work, just that. And a lot of times they'll change it if you start really talking about, what does this look like, what does it really look like, and how someone talks, or how you run a meeting, or how you deal with a problem, in some part of the process. um, it's a huge shift in the energy of the company. There's a huge shift in the team, just by everyone understanding what that looks like. you know. So
Yeah,
I think what you did with those.
we used to call that using creating hands and feet for our
No.
standards. For example, we are grateful was one of our standards. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say, okay, what does gratitude look like? And they would come up with, they being the team, would come up with
Right.
the actions that personified that word.
Yeah.
And so it would be, well, we say thank you to the bus driver when we get off the bus. And
Right.
we write thank you notes to teams that come and watch us practice. And
Mm,
we point to the guy who passed us the ball when we score because everybody in the gym sees the shot go in, but they don't always know who passed it. So we're going to point to the guy who passed us the ball.
wow.
We had all these things that we did
I
that
love it.
personified gratitude. And that's how you make it real. That's how you make it alive.
Yeah.
And it's also where a leader can recognize the gaps that exist in understanding, like with
Oh
the word.
yeah. Yeah.
I remember talking about unconditional love at a first team meeting one year. And it became, whatever we do, this, that, and that, it all comes on the foundation of unconditional love. That means that we love you no matter what, even if we're upset about a play that you made, or even if you're late and you're suspended because of grades or whatever.
Right.
We're always going to love you no matter what. And I could see from faces in the room that there were so many who couldn't comprehend what that was like. Maybe they didn't come
Mm.
from an environment where that
Right.
was the case. And
Right.
so it dawned on me that it did me no good to toss around unconditional love when they
Right.
didn't understand what it meant and what it felt like. And so we had to
Right.
backtrack and try to figure out ways to build that and then recognize, okay, this is it. This is it. You see that? Like you didn't guard that guy. He went past
Right.
you. Your
Right.
teammate is still loves you and appreciates you. And
Right.
it starts really small like that and then you build on it. But words without actions and floaty words are the hardest.
Yeah.
They sound really good,
They
but
sound really good.
yeah, when
Yeah.
there's no
What does that
connection, they don't
actually
make any.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Anything else that you would love to share with the audience?
Well, I would just maybe say this that it might seem odd that my two careers here, my speaking career, writing career, and my basketball coaching career, they may sort of seem odd to some people that there's not much of a connection, but I think there's a very obvious connection for me, and I think others would see that as well, and I think it translates. Why I wanted to bring it up now. Becoming a great athlete or becoming a coach, all those things involve doing hard stuff even when you don't want to. There's an everydayness to it that is necessary to give you a chance. It's like the price of admission. The price of
Yeah.
admission of being a good player is you go to the gym every day. Doesn't mean you're going to
Right.
be. It's just the
Right.
price you have to pay to have a chance to be.
Right.
And the same is true for writing. You just get up and you write every day.
Mm.
And some days it's good and you're like, well, this is a keeper. And some days it's just trash. And you just hit delete and it goes away. And you've sat at the computer for 3 hours and you have nothing to show for it. Well, athletes go through that too. You go to the gym
Mm.
sometimes and you can't buy a bucket. And some days it feels like butter coming out of your hand. That's sort of how achievement works. It's the consistency of showing up, whether you feel like it or not, and doing the little things step by step by step by step. As Anne Lamott says, you write bird by bird. That's just what you do. And I think that that translates to a million other ways of making a living or achievement paths.
Yeah.
It's just the consistent determination to get up and do the best you can and to do the work. Just do the work.
Yeah. And what jumps out at me and what you just said is do the work, and it gives you the opportunity, but it's not necessarily a guarantee.
No guarantees.
I and you just made me think of, I don't know if you and I had talked about this, but I ran track and my event was hurdles, the short, especially, well, women, my last year in high school was the first year they allowed women to run the longer distance hurdle event. So so that was fun because we were breaking records all the time, but it also was a free for all. We had not been training for, multiple years. But I was really lined up to go to the state semifinals in California, which was a really big deal and something that I had been working toward. And I was showing up to work toward it. And um, in the race that was going to determine who was going to go from Southern California or from the San Diego area, the woman next to me jump started. And I was so primed. I knew this was my race. I just knew it in my body. I ended up being further out from the blocks. So they called me as the person who had the false start. And my coach had it on. I mean, this is back way before, way before they were videotaping, but my coach was videotaped just from, or what would you, I guess, whatever the old school videos were back then. I'm trying to think,
Channel
Super
5,
8.
News Line. Yeah.
And he had it, and he knew that it wasn't me. But back then, the commissioner, after, blah, 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 everything, called, said, I'm sticking with it, and pulled me out. I never had another chance. That was
Yeah.
it. that was my one chance. And you just made me think of that because you don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, in my mind, I knew I had done everything to be. I knew that was my race, and I was going to get a PR. I knew it, and um, poof, gone. And I mean, then I had to run the 300-meter hurdles. I'm crying the whole way because that wasn't my race. I mean, I was like, okay, I'll do okay, but it's not my race. But you just never know. And I think the same thing is true. Look, there are so many businesses that were primed to do certain things before COVID hit. That didn't happen. Like, you just never know. I have a son who's an
Right.
entrepreneur right now. He thinks, XYZ is going to happen. I think XYZ is going to happen, but you just never know. There are so many other things. But when you show up, as you said, and you put in whatever that work is, whether it's the writing, whether it's at the gym, whatever it is, then you create the opportunity. Because if you don't do that, you've
No
already
chance.
lost.
And the thing
Right.
is, there are such residuals from that. You may
Right.
not get the thing that you think you want, but you're
Right.
getting a lot of stuff that you're going to need.
Yeah.
And that's, that in athletics, that's especially in college coaching, because every player you get at the college level was a star high school player.
Right.
When
Right.
you're at a major college, all these kids were
Right.
many of them the best player their hometown
Right.
had ever seen or their school had
Right.
ever seen. And they can't all play. They
Right.
can't all play at once. There's enough
Right.
allowed, no matter how good the whole team is.
Right.
And they have to learn that their experience may be something different than what they had envisioned.
Right.
That
Right.
does not mean that it's any less valuable or any
Right.
less fulfilling or any less preparatory for the rest of their lives. It just
Yeah.
means that it's different. And I think that you have to carry that within you because there's so much that we can't control around us,
Right.
regardless of whether it's sports or business, family, health and sickness. There are just so many
Yeah.
things that you can't predict. And
Right.
so you show up every day, and that's why I think it's so important to love the work that you do.
Yeah.
How do you show up every day with no guarantees if you're doing work that doesn't make your heart
Right.
sing? How
Right.
does that?
Oh, I
I never
agree
get
with
that
you on
process.
that. I agree with you on that, Sherri. Oh, I just think that the metaphors and what you've shared in your journey are so applicable to so many different scenarios, right? So whether someone listening wants to write, or maybe they want a career in athletics, or they're looking for a new job that they can really connect their passions to, whatever it is. I love how you are very clear and straightforward, and you're someone who you can feel the energy of. You live what you say, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things, is to hear and to be in the presence of someone who really lives the talk, walks the talk.
Well,
And
that's a
I
beautiful
feel that too.
compliment. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I have been so blessed to not just have a great family, unbelievable foundational family from Healdton, Oklahoma on up, but also the people I met along the way, my college coaches and teachers, some of whom are in both of the books. But I just have, there have been little angels all along the
Mm,
path, and I just feel so blessed
mm,
to have crossed paths with them and to be at this stage of my life and have grandchildren near that I can take care of and be around on a daily basis. It's just amazing. It really is.
mm. Well, and it comes across. And if people want to find out more about you, how can they find you?
Well, that's a great question because I'm sort of averse to social media, and this
Okay.
is my choice. And I'm
Okay.
glad you mentioned that because I've never really said this anywhere, but I made a decision while coaching that I didn't want to be addicted to a device because when
Mm,
you're looking at a thing, you're not looking at everything else. And
right.
I've already like I'm afraid I'm not going to see something that's fantastic. So why why would I put my face? So I drew a hard line. It was a very the university set me up a Twitter account and I was never on it, and it
Mm,
was just it sat there because I didn't want to do it. And
right.
book publishers tell me you've got to build a social media presence,
Right.
and I just don't because I don't want to do it.
Okay.
I understand the value of it. I get it. It all makes perfect sense to me, but it doesn't fit in my priorities.
Right.
And so
Right.
I don't do it. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there.
Okay. All right.
And my website is sherrycole.com. Super
Okay.
easy to remember.
Very
And I
easy.
do a weekly blog. The subscription is free. If you subscribe, you also get a monthly newsletter. And it's just a way for me to continue pushing myself to write and write better because I know people are going to read it. So
Um,
information there will also be my book information will also be there.
okay. And we'll
Ready
also,
to Rise is on, and then the compost
yeah.
file.
And congratulations on the launch of your new book. I'm
Thank
excited
you.
to see that. And yes, for anyone who wants links to the books, they are in the show notes. And I just want to say thank you so much, Sherri, for coming on the show. I appreciate you sharing your story with me and with the audience. And thank you so much for being open and vulnerable about who you are and what matters.
Well, thank you for the work you do and for the platform you provide. And if I'm ever on the West Coast, I think we must go to lunch.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.